Matthew Lee, Inner City Press, on behalf of the Free UN Coalition for Access. Thanks a lot for doing this briefing. The report makes reference to the need for humanitarians to speak out when they see violations, and talks about the Rights Up Front initiative, which came from Sri Lanka, where I think OCHA, in self-criticism, pulled itself out maybe too early from the north. So I wanted to know, since you've been, how does this summit, what do you think of the issue, the critique, for example, that Médecins Sans Frontières has sometimes made of either the UN being quiet or not reaching deep enough into areas like South Sudan? What have you done since your tenure, and what can you say about that? Maybe relatedly, are you aware of any UN humanitarian facility in Sana'a recently hit by an airstrike? And if you are, why hasn't that been made public? And if you're not, then you're not. And finally, on CERF, the question arose to the spokesman about Somaliland, where UN, FAO and others have said they face drought and even famine. And some wonder why a disbursement was made to Ethiopia and not Somaliland. Are there any legal issues as to that? Is there some, what's the reasoning there? Thank you.
I'll try and cover those. On the latter point, it was very important that the application to the CERF was met for Ethiopia, clearly, and we're well aware, not least because it has been OCHA in particular, as well as reinforced by other UN agencies, who are the ones who have been speaking most loudly and from the earliest possible time about the very severe threat that the El Nino effect is having on the Horn of Africa, on East Africa, and indeed on parts of Southern Africa, as well as other parts of the world, very significantly. There is absolutely no issue legally that you seem to imply. I'm aware that there are applications or intended applications to the CERF to help support relief efforts, and as most recently has been identified by FAO, the pressure on food sources and availability of sufficient nutrition in the northern part of both northern part of Somalia, both in Somaliland area and in the Puntland area as well, actually as it happens. And of course, I'm equally aware that we have to make sure that we have the funds in the CERF in order to be able to allocate, and those are not as forthcoming at this point this year as they were at this point last year, which I am assured is primarily to do with budget cycles within various donor treasuries, but clearly we need to make sure that cash flow is running to be able to support these needs as they arise, and to help pump prime and to lever the funds, which the CERF is particularly good, both in terms of the nimble response and the ability to encourage others to step up to help support us when these crises arise. So far as the question of the report is concerned on the protection issues, I think the report is extremely clear in its expectations and vision about how central protection of civilians in conflict is across all its aspects, including the protection of women in cases of sexual violence, both arising in conflict and indeed when not even in conflict. So protection is absolutely central, and that's part of where we hope there will be a serious reinforcement of the commitment, particularly to the obligations already signed up to by all member states, or at least certainly most member states. And the question that you imply, I can assure you there's been no quietness or silence from me about anything that's taken place which has hit essential infrastructure, not least medical facilities. And it's absolutely clear that in Yemen there is a major humanitarian crisis. Whilst there are 21.2 million people in Yemen who are vulnerable, there are about 5.6 who are in immediate need on both sides of the fighting lines, and it is absolutely critical that in total conformity with what is laid out as the principles set out in this report, is that we demand safe, unimpeded access, irrespective of where people are, how their need arose, and our only test is to try and meet need and vulnerability, and to have our convoys loaded with all the right materials, whether it's food, water, purification kits, blankets, medical kits, and any kind of medical attention, and to be able to evacuate the wounded. And those demands remain completely absolute.
Thank you. Mr. Lee.
Sure. Yesterday, I'd asked you about a use of the UN press briefing room by Frank Lorenzo, now indicted, and you'd said that there's a public record of this through Malu media alerts. So I went back and looked at the media alert for September 8th, 2011, when he appeared in the then UN press briefing room, and there's a UN photo taken of him there promoting the South-South news, all of which appear in the indictment. So I wanted to ask you, like, how did this now, in this particular instance of an individual now indicted, subject of audits, how did that use take place? Was it a lent use? Because it's not in the public
Matthew, I'm
disclosure
done.
that you described.
It's a public briefing. I'm done answering questions.
You say
about
that. This
room.
is a guy who's indicted. And so
Yes,
how did he get in there?
Maggie.
Did he? The guy's indicted.